It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. My name's Sammy James. Welcome to the show. Today, it is the Thursday Club as we preview Fulham's first home game of the 24-25 season. Leicester City at the Cottage, 3 o'clock in the August sunshine. What more could you want? I'm joined today on the Thursday Club by Jack Collins. Hello.
Hello, Sammy. How you doing?
Good, thanks, mate. And live from Surrey, Peter Rutzler. Hello.
Hello, guys. How are we doing? You all right?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Thanks for joining us, mate. 2 weeks in a row, absolutely bloody honoured.
I know. Let's see how long that lasts during the season.
Especially, Peter, when you're dropping exclusive bombs like on Tuesday when Sander Berge is coming to Fulham. That was an exciting one to see in my Twitter timeline. There's lots to get through today, lots of transfers. We'll talk about Joachim Andersen. We'll talk about André. We'll talk about some of the other rumours as well. But first of all, Peter, we'll dive straight into Sander Berge because I did not see this one coming. Obviously, Andersen has been mooted for a little while. When and where did this rumour start entering your DMs or inbox or however you find out about these transfers? It's an exciting one.
It was one of those that it was a collective effort as well. It wasn't just me, which is helpful, particularly if you've got, obviously we've got Andy Jones up there who does Burnley. So when you get hold of some information, you can cross-reference with the people they know, so that makes things quite quick. And to be honest, it was quite quick. As soon as we find out, we try and get to publish as soon as we can. I'm not going to go into who and how.
No, fine.
That's the trade secret. But yeah, I suppose it's come from the blue a little bit because much of the conversation, I think, through the summer has centred on, first of all, André at Fulham FC and Scott McTominay at Manchester United, two quite different players when looking to strengthen your midfield, but you know the offers that have been made have been in a pretty similar ballpark. You could see what the budget really was. I don't think Berge is. I mean, it's a surprise that it in terms of it hadn't been discussed. And to be honest, Fulham are quite good at doing that. Really, they're quite good at keeping these deals pretty under wraps. I'm sure they'd be desperate to get one completely over the line without anyone getting to it, but I think they will get one eventually. But with Berge, I think he was a player that Fulham had looked at before, and I was trying to think back because it wasn't the first time I'd sort of looked into a possible deal with him, and I think it was January 2023 off the top of my head, where there was a lot of talk about him as a target, and so again, and we've seen that again with other players that they've gone for, that there is that continuity. There is a sense there are clearly players that the head coach likes, that the recruitment team likes at Fulham, and when they become available, they try and pick them up. I think with Berge, it's going to be interesting to see where he fits into midfield, and I'd be interested to see what Marco Silva says about that. When we spoke to him last week, I asked him about what he wanted from a number 6. You know, what do you want now that Palhinha's gone? He was quite unique. Not many players can do what he does, and that's why Bayern spent so much money on him, because you know there's no other tackler really, ball winner like him in Europe at the moment. And whether Silva wanted a similar profile, and he said they did. And also mentioned within that, you know, not that you can replace Palhinha, but also that someone who could be good at set pieces, because Palhinha was quite effective in those areas as well, which wasn't as much of a thinking point for me. And I suppose Berge can tick a few of those boxes. I don't think he's the same player. So I'm very curious to see what that will look like in midfield. But yeah, it's exciting. It's not completely done yet. So let's hope it gets over the line and be one thing to get the podcast out, and then suddenly it's all gone to pieces. But yeah, it should be really interesting to see what happens.
Oh, yeah. Well, as we record this on Wednesdays and it doesn't go out until Thursday, there will be another 3 links that we didn't know about by the time this is published. But as is the way of the Fulhamish podcast. I mean, Jack, Sander, often I think of him as an 8, but...
Is that because he wears 8? Is that because he's worn 8 on his back?
Yeah, but I thought he was a bit more of box-to-box midfielder and not a commanding number 6. Peter is right. you're not necessarily going to find someone that is a like for like Palhinha replacement. I guess the question on a lot of people's minds and lips is this not just the Palhinha replacement? Is this the André replacement? Is this the only person that's going to come into centre midfield, and it's going to be him alongside someone probably like Sasa Lukic?
Well, those people who have been listening across the course of the summer have heard me banging on since the very start that I think we need two in the midfield. So it is interesting kind of seeing where Fulham are going with some of the bids. I mean, look, the McTominay and André bids seem to be going simultaneously, as opposed to one or the other. And I think, the way that Peter points out there, they're very, very different players. And so therefore Fulham are clearly looking for slightly different things in midfield. I think that there are some things about Sander Berge I really, really like. Physically, I think he profiles really well as a 6. He was a 6 when he was at Genk. And we saw a lot of him there in that kind of deeper role. Since he's moved to the Premier League, he hasn't really done that. And his numbers don't hugely stack up, especially in terms of tackles, in terms of duels. Very few people do, right? And this is the thing. So, I mean, to quote Pep Guardiola, we cannot replace him. Palhinha is that kind of player, right? And you often need to kind of replace him in the aggregate. So when you're kind of looking after...
All right, Brad Pitt.
Well, thanks, mate. But, we look at these kind of things and we imagine what Fulham are looking for. Well, what does Berge bring that we're lacking in the middle? Well, that physicality, that aerial duel strength, both of those things. I do think that he has more in him as a 6, and the market's really hard out there for pure 6s. There aren't many of them. That's why Palhinha is worth so much. It's why so many teams have struggled. It's why City are struggling to find a Rodri kind of understudy, because there aren't very many top quality 6s. It's why United have struggled for years. Those things all kind of matter, and you have to kind of look at the market as a bit more of a cohesive whole. So I wonder if there is an element of seeing someone who has physically profiles quite well in that role and thinking, can we discipline him into being that kind of holding midfielder that Fulham probably slightly lacking at the moment. There are certain bits that I'm not so sure about. I'm not completely convinced by his passing range, in the way that actually Palhinha had an underrated, I think, ability to switch the play, etc. But with Joachim Andersen potentially coming in as well, maybe you kind of, again, do it in the aggregate, a couple of different players who do different things. I still think that Fulham probably should be looking at someone who can pick up the ball and dictate from deep, which is the André mould of player, but not necessarily Sander Berge. Although I do think there's a lot about his game that might be adapted quite nicely to fit in with this Fulham system.
So potentially this doesn't mean that Andre's off the table. It almost certainly, though, means McTominay, Peter. If we're going to go for Sander Berge, we're not signing Scott McTominay. As fun as it was on Friday in the away end to sing Scott McTominay loves the Fulham and Scott McTominay wants to play for us, it probably feels like if we're going to go for Sander Berge, that is the end of, I wouldn't say the McTominay dream, because I don't feel like many fans really were dreaming of Scott McTominay, but I don't know. Sander Berge is an interesting one as well, Peter, because he's played for 2 relegated clubs in a row. He's played for Sheffield United. He then, went down with them. He then went for Burnley. They went down. I don't know if he's necessarily had the best chance to prove exactly what he can do. I mean, he did also prove himself quite well in that season that Sheffield United finished 9th, but that's quite a long time ago. Well,
I can speak from experience and say that relegation tags can be removed. There are some good omens there. But no, I think you're right. I think he's played in two teams where it's been very difficult. Burnley trying to stick to their principles last year, it's not really worked out. And of course, he was impressive in that first campaign, as you pointed out, but with Sheffield United. So I think there's an element of point to prove there. But I think he's always been a player that people have been interested in. And just circling back to the first part of what you're saying and the Scott McTominay aspect, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. I know the Fulham fans in the UAE really enjoyed that when he was coming on with the chants that he wants to play for Fulham. They did enjoy that. But it was interesting that when the story broke, when we published our story, a lot of the feedback was Man United fans, because there had been talk of Berge being on the United radar as someone that they would look at if McTominay left, and that kind of points to your point, right, about similar profiles and how they sort of were seen in a similar sort of picture, if that makes sense. My opinion on the André aspect, I can only go on what I've reported so far, and that's nothing since July. So as far as I'm concerned, I haven't been in a position to report anything new on that since that point, which, to me says that nothing's going to happen. I can't say that for definite because we know what Fulham are like, and it's not like this has been a deal far away. Fulham had put an offer on the table and Fluminense had gone back and said, we want more money. And that's kind of where it's just kind of left. So it's not to say it's not there, but you then look at what Fulham had spent, looking at Andersen, Sander Berge, then Emil Smith-Rowe, Jorge Cuenca, but he's not too much money in the grand scheme of things. And then Silva spoke, I think, to TV after the game or before the game on Friday, talking about wanting another forward. And we've done a story today saying that Fulham have bid for Rayan Cherki at Lyon. So I get the sense that once Berger is signed and sealed, once that's done, providing everything goes well, then it will be a change in tack, if anything, for the last week of the window.
Yeah, let's move on, Jack, to Joachim Andersen. It emerged last night, and Peter, it was your colleague, David Ornstein, who broke this in The Athletic. There'd been rumours about Andersen for a little while, but that Fulham had agreed a deal with Palace in the region of about £30 million when you included lots of add-ons. I'd say that the main reaction to this from the Fulham fan base has been positive. We've all got good memories of left-footed Joachim Andersen. He's right-footed. He's right-footed. I'm sorry, everyone. He's right-footed. Coming back to Fulham. But I have seen one or two who are a bit less sure about whether this is the right move. Obviously, Anderson's not super young. £30 million is quite a lot of money. Are you necessarily going to recoup much of that back? But I kind of feel like it is always important to worry about sell-on value, and that's a very prudent thing. But ultimately, if Joachim Andersen comes in and performs well for us for 4 to 5 years in the Premier League, even if he goes for nothing at the end of that, that's money well spent.
Yeah, I mean, it works out like 6 million a year, and that's if all the add-ons are completed and everything goes to plan, right? So obviously we don't know the exact details of what those add-ons include and the deal, but I wonder what it looks like in terms of upfront cost and how much that is costing Fulham from that kind of regard. It's an interesting one. I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm generally positive, I think, about the fact that Andersen's coming in. And I spoke last week, right, about leadership and the squad getting a lot younger, and actually a lot of the big characters in the dressing room, a lot of the kind of leadership figures over the last few years. And you think all the way back, Alexander Mitrovic was in that leadership group, Tim Ream was, Bobby De Cordova-Reid was. We're not seeing all that much of Tom Kearney on the pitch for the last couple of times or the last couple of seasons. There's this element now where Bernd Leno was wearing the armband in that game. I don't know if it's just me, but I really don't like goalkeepers as captains. It bugs me in some regards. And so I wonder if there is an element here with Fulham bringing in players, to be honest, Berger as well, who's 26, 27.
Yeah.
We're looking here in a bit more of a middle ground in terms of finding those players who are in their peaks, who have Premier League experience, which is clearly something that Silva speaks about. But I wonder if Andersen is coming back in to fulfill a leadership capacity as much as to be a first-choice centre-back. And that's not to say he won't, I think he will. But to come back in and improve the players around him, to give a little bit of direction and leadership in that area. And I think you saw, we go back to the Manchester United game and you can look at it and think, well, Calvin Bassey completely and utterly missing the ball in the last minute and letting Garnacho miss an absolute sitter. But, take that away. That's not something we saw loads of from Bassey last season. He wasn't a player, who had a proclivity to a howler. And yet he had that moment. And I wonder if, the lack of Paulinho in there, the lack of just that kind of leadership core might be a sense of, okay, let's just remove that and let's allow someone with that sense of calm and kind of command, I suppose, to come in and rule that back line and dictate how it works. I think that might be as much of it as anything else.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, the mad thing about Joachim Andersen is I never saw him play live in the flesh for Fulham, because it was that COVID season, and there was only, I think, 2 opportunities to act, maybe 3 if you included the United away. But you obviously went to a lot of those COVID games. I'm sure that you've tried to repress those memories as much as you can. But you saw a lot of Andersen. You saw that famous diagonal ball over the top, and I'm excited to see that back. Do I think that Joachim Andersen's the best defender ever? No. But I do see that him and Bassi could be quite a nice combination. Bassi's pace maybe making up for where Andersen lacks, but Bassi probably hasn't quite got the range of passing as Joachim Andersen. So in theory, that is quite a nice little defensive pairing.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's Cottage Tactico who's put up a quite nice graphic where you can see how the two centre-backs, Calvin Bassi and Joachim Andersen, complement each other really well. I think you're right. Just on a basic level, I think Andersen's sort of USP is his ball playing, right? It's his ability to pick out a pass, those long sweeping diagonals. And in those empty stadiums during that very odd year, he did that a lot. And it was nice. I mean, you had Tosin doing that as well. It was quite an impressive back line, really, when it comes to players comfortable with the ball at their feet. And it's interesting because you say Andersen and Bassi, but you could also say Diop and Cuenca. They sort of complement each other, I think, quite nicely as well. So it's all about profiles fitting. And in that sense, it's like we all know that Fulham needed to have a ball-playing defender. The right centre-back, that's what it needed to be coming into this summer once it was clear that Tosin was leaving. And you would you'd think, well, they need a Joachim Andersen. So, what Fulham have done is they've just gone and got Joachim Andersen, which, like that makes sense. Because we've got a rating series on The Athletic, which has a mixed reception, but it does offer some interesting insight.
Is he going to get a mid-300s rating? 350 odd?
Absolutely. But you're going through the sort of risk element, and there isn't much at all. He's played for the club. He lives in London. He's played in the Premier League for 4 years. Hasn't missed a game for 4 years, pretty much, apart from the odd one or two, maybe a couple from suspension. Fans have a good relationship with him. Manager wants a right centre back who can play out with the ball at his feet. He's probably one of the best in the league at that. The only risk is the fee, as Sammy said, and that only becomes a problem if he doesn't play over the course of his contract. So it's that trade-off, right? There's a compromise, and I think there needs to be there has to be a balance, right? And we've talked about how old the Fulham squad is. Fulham's USP, and we talked about this last week, but sorry to go over old ground, but what they've done is they've picked out prime players. They've not done what Brighton are doing or what Bournemouth are trying to do. They've picked out players that are at their peak in the Premier League and have proven that they can play in the Premier League, and put them in the team and made them play and they do really well. What they've not had enough of is having some young players that they can sell, because you just can't do it as a financial model when you're a club of Fulham size. And I think Andersen's on the other end. It's like, well, we need a first choice central defender, so go and get one from Palace. And I think, it makes that's the thing. You look at it and you assess what they want. It ticks all the boxes.
I mean, it has gone full circle, Jack, when you think back to some of the transfers that were first made under kind of Tony Khan's stewardship, the Johan Mollos of the world, just like purely stats-based signings, the Michael Maddles, and now
we stop slagging off Michael Maddle in this podcast. Michael Maddle was class.
You get what I mean, though. And then now we're into we're just going to buy. It just feels like quite obvious, some of our signings. I don't hate it, but it feels like it used to be pointless trying to predict who Fulham would sign, because it's like, well, we're not going to come up with them. It does feel like 3 or 4 of these signings are who I would have said to someone down the pub that we could get if it was up to me, which I don't hate. It is an interesting model, isn't it? I guess everyone has to be different. And if you can't beat Brighton and Bournemouth at their finding hidden gems strategy, let's just go for the experienced players or players that used to play for us strategy.
I think there's probably an element of Silva's influence that started to affect this. And look, whether that's a good or a bad thing for the club long term, I'm not 100% sure yet. And we won't know until 3 or 4 years down the line. But I do think there is, an associated element of risk with these kind of transfers, that you do need to be able to balance the books in one way or the other. And that isn't going to come just from, the way that we're turning out the academy kids or sending them off. And that we spoke about Jay Stansfield a couple of weeks ago, and you were talking about fees and all of those things. And I get it. And I get you can amortize fees, and I get that you pay them over a period of time. But I do think there is an element of Fulham needing to get better at being able to offload players, right? And that's not to say that, you have to suddenly start selling all your youngsters. And look, I think that lads down the road are doing the worst job of all at this, right? But there is this kind of question mark over what it looks like in a couple of years' time, or if that funding gets pulled. And you said on your predictions last week that you thought the Khans might sell the club by the end of the year. Where does that leave Fulham in terms of finances? Where does it leave us in terms of being able to reinvest? And look, I'm not saying these two situations are the same, but towards the end of Mohamed Al Fayed's tenure at the club, Fulham bought a lot of older players with no sell-on value. There was no real value in that squad. And when we got relegated, it took a long time to turn things around again because we didn't have the cash kind of flow to be able to just do that. And so I am a little bit wary of it. But in this particular instance, it does feel like Silva's influence in terms of wanting players with Premier League experience and wanting physical players. I think this is really interesting. Something that you kind of see across the bank in terms of Silva signings and the players that Fulham are going to is this level of physicality. And that doesn't mean that everyone is 6'4", and built like a tank. But I think you look at the players that Silva tends to like and play regularly. And you look at players with good work rates. You look at players who are physically strong and tall. And I think there is an element of Fulham trying to play on, and maybe this is a little bit of a kind of over the top analogy, but there's an element of the old kind of West Ham about it, where actually you become a bit of a nightmare to play against physically because you have to come up against, imagine a midfield coming up against, and you're a small diminutive midfielder and you can see Sander Berge and Sasha Lukic sort of storming around in front of you. It's not like that much fun, especially if the ball's going high a lot of the time. And I wonder if Fulham are just turning into a slightly more kind of physical unit because that's what, and this isn't a kind of mid-table criticism, and it's not criticism at all, to be honest. Arsenal are doing it. You look at Arsenal's squad and you look at those players, and the spine of the team is built of really, really strong big players and other players who carry the ball well. So Kai Havertz isn't necessarily someone that you'd go, oh, he looks like a physical specimen. But he's incredibly difficult to knock off the ball. He's got an incredible work rate and he's really scrappy. I certainly see that in someone like Andreas. You look at Adama, who he seems to prefer over a Harry Wilson, for example, and you think, well, what's he bringing to the table? Physicality. I wonder if Fulham are going to become one of those teams that are an absolute nightmare for teams to come up against because we just physically dominate. And that's why I'm interested by quite a lot of these signings.
Yeah. Peter, one question that actually a mate of mine who doesn't support Fulham asked me, and I think I knew the answer, but I was also like, it is an interesting point. What's in this move for Andersen? Because Palace to Fulham, look, I'd join Fulham in a heartbeat if it was me, but, I am slightly biased.
Putney, Norwood.
Yeah, but all the players live in Cobham, no matter where they're from. So that's a by the by.
He still lives in Chelsea, I believe.
It's kind of a sideways move in terms of the Premier League. Is it just the increase in wages which has been reported?
Yeah, I need to get across the detail to be certain, but the most likely outcome is probably, I think, considering where he is. So he's 28, right? So you're looking at probably one more big contract, your best contract. As in, you can get some more big contracts, but your best contract is kind of now at the peak. So if you're moving at this age, you're expecting your best contract, and it could just be as simple as Palace weren't going to pay what Fulham are willing to pay in terms of salary. And I suppose if you look at the two projects, Fulham have invested a fair bit this summer. I was thinking just then, technically, I think with obviously Smith Rowe was a club record transfer. Don't think Berger's not far away from the previous record, which I was told actually, and I've reported this with the Smith Rowe deal, was actually Mitrovic. It wasn't Seri or Anguissa, because their add-ons were not met. So in terms of guaranteed sum that you have to pay with a transfer, Mitrovic was the most expensive, beaten by Smith Rowe. Berger's not far away from that. They've actually spent quite a lot of money this summer overall. So you're thinking, okay, well, Fulham are still, they're spending a lot of money, pushing on for a bit. I don't think Palace have matched that really this summer. So there may be an element of that comes into it. You think, well, if I'm not going to get the move to a team playing in Europe, then I want to be to a team that I think may get closer to it. But yeah, and aside from any lingering affection there is for Fulham, I would put it down to the contract. As I say, without knowing the full details of what they are and what's been offered. And and whether else, that seems most likely, right?
Yeah, that was my thought when I actually looked at it. And he's got 2 years left on his deal at Crystal Palace. So he'd be 30 when that contract expires. Probably his best position to get a great contract is now. And he could now probably sign a 4 or 5 year deal with Fulham. You'd imagine probably 4, maybe probably with an option of a 5th. Great money. That's 2 extra years that he's got financial security for. So I guess there's possibly just an element of that. And maybe he's looking at the 2 clubs being like, well, similar-ish profiles, but one's going to guarantee a bit more money for a bit longer. So I'll take that move. I want to come on to the final rumour, which is Rayan Cherki. The Athletic also reported this, a hat-trick for the Athletic this week in terms of reporting Fulham transfer rumours.
Bosh.
Every rumour seems to either be a former player or someone we've been linked with like several windows in a row. This was definitely a big one from, I think, last January, where I thought this was going to happen on deadline day, and then it was just Breuer. He seems an incredibly exciting footballer. He's a left winger. There's an argument as to whether we need another left winger, but I kind of feel like Jack, no doubting his pedigree.
Yeah, I mean, he's an incredibly exciting footballer, and the fee being reported by the Athletic, that £12 million fee, that's a steal for a player who is technically incredibly gifted. One of those players who just seems to have the ball on a string at any given moment. I love Rayan Cherki. I've been watching him at Lyon for a while, and it looks like they need to sell him this summer. Lyon having a complete clear out is a bit of a basket case right now. But you kind of look at what he would bring to the table, and it's something it's very in that Willian mould. He likes to drift inside and take those shots from the edge of the area. He has that ability to keep the ball in close control. He's not the most explosive winger. He's not a really, really rapid winger. But in terms of what he does with the ball and having it just glued to his feet, he's an incredible footballer. There have been, and it's probably worth pointing out, some question marks about his kind of commitment levels. But it also, that probably needs to be put in context with the idea that Lyon seemed to have been trying to sell him for like 4 years, despite the fact he's one of their more successful academy products. And he kept getting left out of the team by random managers, and Lyon have been, all over the place for quite a while. So it's worth just kind of noting all those things, but an incredibly talented footballer. And at that kind of money, if that's on the table, I would be very excited.
Yeah, Peter, I feel like maybe this is a slightly different profile of left winger, because all the options on the left we have, which I think you could comfortably say is Iwobi, Smith Rowe and Sessegnon, none of them are dribblers, are they? None of them really beat a man and go past them. And I mean, Jack just mentioned that he's not like blessed with like Adama levels of pace, but still,
he's not slow. He's just not like overly quick.
It does feel like maybe this is just another option. And actually, you saw it on Friday. I felt a bit like Fulham went 1-0 down in the 87th minute. We didn't have a huge ton of options to bring off the bench in order to get us something late on. Obviously, Adama was already off the pitch by that point. He's the natural go-to. So it would be nice for Silva just to have someone on the bench that he can go like, right, you go on and make an impact. And obviously he could break his way into the first team too, but there's a lot of competition.
Yeah, and I think Jack hit the nail on the head there. He's a ball to feet player. He's almost a number 10 that plays in wide areas. I think he does actually play a lot as a 10. I mean, Lyon have had so many coaches that it's been hard to keep track of at times. But yeah, he's definitely a different option. He's definitely of the Willian sort of mould. So it does make sense in that way. I think it would suggest that Smith Rowe would be more of a 10, but then, there's the versatility there, and, this is a team that play with positional rotations, so that's not an issue with players moving into wide areas, coming in field, and if they're comfortable in those central areas or the wide areas and the pockets, then it fits really quite nicely. And I think that's what Fulham need on that left, with Robinson making the overlaps and the underlaps. That gets the best out of him as well. And I think in those 3 you talked about, I think Silva mentioned this in his press conference, but he sees Sessegnon as a left back. So he says he can play further up the field, but that's where they're looking at him to play. So maybe that does open up that scope to recruit in that area. I think, Cherki's, Jack talked about, he's such a talented player. I don't think we've seen the best of him I mean, last season Lyon went through 3 different coaches, were bottom of the table in late November, appointed the caretaker to take over full time, and he gets them to 6th. And Cherki didn't really play that much. He played a lot from the bench, and that's kind of been his journey, really. He's in the last year of his contract as well. I think so. This would be the time to move. It'd be interesting to see if it happens, basically, is what I'm getting to. I think there would need to be some persuading as well. He's been linked with Dortmund. He was linked with PSG.
Palace.
The big one.
Yeah.
So we keep us
Roma.
versus Palace.
He was supposed to be going to Roma earlier in the window. That looked like it was going to be a done deal, and then it all fell apart last minute. And that seems to be the case with him on a relatively regular basis. So he's clearly relatively picky about where he wants to go. But those options are starting to dry up, it looks like.
Well, that's it. And he's not training with his teammates at Lyon at the moment. So PSG aren't interested. I've confirmed that. But now, but if he's not training with his teammates and the club want to move him, then let's see what happens. A tricky one to do, but I think, as I said earlier in the pod, I think that area is what we'll be looking at in the final week before deadline.
And then Jack, Peter said that he's not heard any rumours, but Fulham Twitter still has not let the idea of us signing André drop. Fulham Twitter is obsessed by André. We're all obsessed by André. I don't think I've ever talked about a player that's not actually a Fulham player on this podcast quite as much.
Jason Kumas.
Well, a bit before our time, but yes.
Dwight Gale.
Bloody André. Last night there was this video going around of André crying after Fluminense beat Grêmio in a penalty shootout. It did look like the kind of last look at the stadium kind of feel to it.
Yes.
Can you see a world of a midfield trio of André, Sander Berge, Emil Smith-Rowe? Because that's one hell of a midfield trio if we did it, but it would also surely mean the end for someone like Harrison Reed.
Yeah, there's definitely going to have to be outgoings if these players all come in, right? So that's probably worth considering. And I think, to be honest, even if a forward comes in, I wonder if they'll look to move on someone like a Harry Wilson, not because they don't think he's good enough, but because there is just so much competition for those roles. And again, that physicality that I talked about earlier, I wonder if that's the kind of shape that Marco's trying to go in those areas. But of course I can see that world. It's like that meme, isn't it? Where you're like, oh, if this had happened and there's like utopian things and cars in the sky and stuff. If Fulham had a midfield of, Sander Berge and Emil Smith-Rowe and André, Champions League, we'd tilt at the title.
The champions.
Yeah, exactly. I can hear the music at the Cottage now. But
the violins, the string quartet.
Off we go. But look, I think everyone's getting a little bit excited about this video. It does look a little bit like a goodbye. It also might be an incredibly emotional moment because he's just got a club basically, further in the Copa Libertadores in a game that took a lot out of them. And the crowd were amazing and they were chanting his name for the whole thing. When you look at it, and when I've spoken to people in Brazil about this, there is a feeling that Fluminense need to sell him financially. There is also this feeling that if they do sell him, they could end up getting relegated, and that might be even worse. So he's sort of stuck between stations in that regard. I think Fulham, and Peter kind of mentioned it earlier, I believe Fulham have left that bid on the table. Now, whether they remove that or not is probably a different question. And if Fluminense came back and were like, right, we'll accept it, then obviously you'd have to look at the finances, and situation has changed since that bid was put in first. But I do wonder that if they come back in the next couple of weeks and go, well, no one else has come in, we need to move him on. If Fulham see that opportunity, I think they might take it, because I think that they will look at that in a slightly different mold of signing, in that you're potentially buying someone there for a 25 million and selling them for 50 odd because he has that potential to grow. So I wouldn't completely rule it out, but I think Peter's right in that this ball is very much not in Fulham's hands at the moment. It's we have put our offer in for what we think he's worth. If they want to sell him and they need to sell him, then they will come back to that conversation. But for the moment, it doesn't sound like loads has moved from either our side or from the Brazilian side of things, or speaking to people over there. It doesn't feel like much has moved since the last time that we spoke about this.
No,
I think that game was that's his last home game before the window closes, I think. So it could easily be a farewell sentence, but that doesn't necessarily mean he goes to Fulham, for instance. So I think the one thing that's in my mind is that with Fulham spend the money on Sander Berge, I just don't know, and I'd be surprised if they would spend the same amount again. They might, but let's see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be coming on to 100 mil spent, and I know that we've got Polina money.
And Mitrovic money.
Yeah, but it's still, that is a hefty outlay, and that's before you've even factored in the likes of Cuenca and...
To be fair, Brentford just given us, 5 odd million for Fabio Carvalho. So that's good.
Yeah.
There must be some money in. Kieran Bowie got us half a mil. There's definitely some incomings from some of these things.
There's also the Sky Deck.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that might be paying for it all. So we'll see how we go.
All right. We will take a break there afterwards. We'll look ahead to Leicester and go through some of your emails. Sammy here with Jack Collins and Peter Rutzler on the Thursday Club. All right, transfers done for now. Let's look ahead to Leicester City on Saturday at the Cottage. Jack, Leicester played on Monday against Spurs. It was a 1-1 draw. Jamie Vardy, he's the man to mark, isn't he? Because he's still got it. Guzzling Red Bulls at the age of 37. He's going to want to come down the Cottage and extend his scoring record. I mean, look, Fulham have to win this game, and it's mad. We're 2 games in. You can't have a must-win game 2 games in, but especially with what looks like is looking a trickier and trickier trip to Ipswich up next. 2 established Premier League teams in West Ham and Newcastle after that. If we're not winning on Saturday, I'm just getting a little bit angsty.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts and different reviews about different parts of the world and, La Liga and Serie A and the Premier League and all the sorts. And one of the things I've kind of noticed is that everyone is basically trying to get to this period or get through this period ahead of the international break in September. And it's literally that kind of, we've just come off a really busy summer and there hasn't been all that much time for coaches to get pre-season training done with all of their squads, with everyone together. And it just feels like everyone is just trying to kind of get through this first period whilst the window's still open and people don't know what they're working with. And I just feel like everything feels very up in the air right now. Leicester are a bizarre side in that if they play like they did in the first half, I expect us to be 3-0 up by half time. If they play like they did in the second half, then we could have some trouble. So it depends who turns up. Obviously, the last time we played Leicester at Craven Cottage was one of those batshit games of football that anybody's ever seen ever. So I'm kind of hoping not for a repeat of that in some ways. I would like to see some structure and a little bit more kind of sensibility about the way that Fulham go about the game. But there's also these questions of, okay, the medicals are, obviously being done for Berger and Andersen as we record this. The club are trying to get those deals over the line. Are those players going to be ready to play, both in a kind of physical sense and in a sense of will they have gelled with the side enough to actually come into that game and play? So there's loads of different questions flying about in terms of what goes on in this game. I don't necessarily think it's must win. I think it's must not lose.
Yeah.
And Fulham get a point here and then it's one of those games. As long as Fulham is starting to find some sort of rhythm and performances, and look, there was a lot about the Manchester United game to like, as much as some of it had problems and issues, you'd expect that. I think that Fulham will go into this game feeling that they should be winning it and that they can win it, but equally Leicester come up as a bit of a sort of bizarre unit in some ways. I mean, obviously, it's going to be nice to see Bobby Deckled over Reed. Weird to see him in a different colour shirt, but nice to him to kind of come back. But I also think that Stevie Mafididi might play on that wing because he came on and made a real difference from that left-hand side. They're not settled yet either. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting battle in that midfield to try and gain control of this game. Do I think our midfield is stronger than Harry Winks? Yeah, I do. But equally, this side, they look weirdly a little bit more kind of like they know each other. And obviously, Didi and Winks have played together under Maresca last season. They're adapting to Cooper's positional changes and system changes. But I wonder how the midfield battle kind of shakes out in terms of dictating this game.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, with 3 days more rest that Fulham have had going into this game as well. And as Jack mentioned, that first half against Tottenham, I don't know how much of you watched, but I was just... I was open-mouthed at how much... I mean, Spurs should have been 5-6-0 up at half-time, and I don't actually think that's an exaggeration. It should have been an absolute cricket score. But somehow they held on, and I guess that often happens in football, isn't it? You only go 1 goal ahead, and you give the team a sniff in the second half, and that's exactly what happened. So I feel like this is a game that Fulham can win as long as we just manage to find that same amount of pressure that Spurs did on Monday. And with the game being at Craven Cottage, I think we can do that.
Yeah, I think so. I think as Jack was saying, there's the aspect of who's going to be available. I think the thing that Spurs came up against on Monday, of course, is being back in the Premier League. There is still that sort of bounce of getting back into the top division. I know it's not been the easiest summer for Leicester in terms of obviously losing Maresca, but how the squad shaped up a little bit as well. And obviously there's the looming thoughts about points deduction too. But I think when you go on the road, it's a different picture. And I think for Fulham, it's equally important to make the most of these games. There was no sort of bonus point from Old Trafford to sort of fall back on. You want to get these points on the board. And Ipswich the following week is such a tricky game, to be honest, isn't it? You could see how well they played against Liverpool for long periods before that game got away from them. So I think in terms of where Fulham are at, I think we can look at how some of the positives from that game against United, and I think the midfield has been talked about a lot. That would be a role that André Pereira played. I thought Lukic had a quietly effective game at Old Trafford. I thought Pereira was okay. I mean, the two moments that mattered were in transition, and that lack of incision in the final third felt really, really obvious. Which we haven't always talked about with Fulham, really, is having a threat without actually getting too many shots away. But it was really quite a clear thing to come from the game. And I do wonder whether that's a part of it just being a rusty game because the quality of the game was pretty poor, or speaks to something more fundamental. And maybe we've seen that in terms of what's happening in the window. But I think those aspects will improve, particularly when Smith Rowe gets up to match speed a bit quicker. He only played one behind closed doors game for Arsenal, according to Marco Silva, and didn't train for a good week-long period before he signed. So there is that side of it, and just getting up to speed and people understanding each other. So yeah, well, there's not. It's the first game, right? You don't really want to be on the end of a shock defeat in this one.
Yeah, I'm hopeful, Jack, that we can get a result in this one. And in terms of Fulham lineup, I personally would be shocked if there's too much change. I don't think that either new signing, I mean, they're not confirmed at the time of recording, plays. Sander Berge's not had much for pre-season, and it's quite soon just to chuck in Joachim Andersen when we have a perfectly good centre-back in Issa Diop. It would seem a bit desperate just to chuck him straight in with a kind of very, very little need. The only one I wondered is it a Harry Wilson for an Adama? It feels like maybe a game where actually he might just make a few little tweaks in the attacking midfield areas. But I would expect Smith Rowe to play, Iwobi to play, Muniz to play, obviously.
Yeah.
I can't see too much change other than maybe that right hand side.
Adama just obviously is great fun to watch when he's in full flight, but after about 20 minutes I was like, he's just gassed. He's completely gassed, and that's obviously a slight concern in that you're like, well, is Adama just a really effective impact substitute, and is that what his best role is right now? Because if he can't do more than 20 minutes and a half, then there's a little bit of a problem in terms of making sustained attacks work. And if that happens, I wonder if there is a world where we see Andreas shunted forward and then Iwobi on the right, ESR on the left, and then maybe an extra body in midfield, maybe a Harrison Reed. Now, I'd be surprised because that would be a defensive shift in a game that Fulham will be trying to take the initiative in. But if he does pull Adama out of that game, I wonder if actually the move is to go with a slightly more fluid three behind the striker and actually, play a Harrison Reed here with one eye on that being Sander Berge in a couple of weeks. Because I do wonder if, especially in games where Fulham aren't going to have loads of the ball, a Sasha Lukic, Sander Berge midfield is used in terms of just trying to kind of screen the defence between the two of them and as we say, make up Polina's kind of tackle rate between them.
Yeah. Let's move on to some emails, as I've got loads of really good ones which I'd love to rattle through with you guys today. TJ Fogarty says, "Hi Fulhamish, I'm writing in today about our set pieces against United. I thought we looked largely ineffective from corners and other set pieces with both Joao and Tosin out of the squad. Going from 6'4" to 5'10" Andreas removes a lot of aerial threat, and Tosin was obviously a lot better at attacking crosses than Diop. A 6'5" Berge helps with this, but I couldn't help but feeling we weren't going to score every corner or attacking set piece last Friday. Love to hear your thoughts on this issue. All the best from TJ." Peter, I slightly disagree. I thought we looked really dangerous from corners. Free kicks, I'll admit, were absolutely revolting. But like from corners, hitting the near post as we did, there was actually a couple of moments where it was just because the flick wasn't quite right. But I thought we actually looked okay from corners.
Yeah, I thought the corners we were quite relentless at the near post, and I think I didn't think that corners were a particular issue or set pieces. I get where TJ's coming from in terms of there's one thing looking like a threat and another thing scoring, right? So
yeah,
you can say the deliveries were good, but we're not getting on the end of it. Well, that's the issue. That's the crux of the problem, and I think just going back, I mentioned it earlier in the pod, but the fact that Silver even mentioned it on Friday about the threat that Palhinha had from set plays, and that's something that looks like will be addressed pretty swiftly by Berge. So yeah, there's no doubt that will be a factor.
This next one from Sam Smith, I love this, titled "Regarding Jack Collins's first sip of his pint." The email says, "Dear Sammy, I am a long-time listener, but never felt the need to get in touch. I have recently been enjoying watching the pods on YouTube and noticed something at 7 minutes and 8 seconds. Jack Collins either took the biggest first sip of a pint I have ever seen, or he was trying to split the G of his Guinness, perhaps on instinct. Well, congrats to him, because it seems that he split it perfectly, intentionally or not. Image attached. Anyway, sorry for the random contact. It was just too amusing to let by." Well, it's good that Sam Smith listens to the podcast. I enjoyed that. There's the picture of you, Jack. I'm putting this on the YouTube for people to see as well.
Yeah, completely nailed it.
Peter, I will send this to you on WhatsApp. He has incredibly well split the G live on camera, and so nonchalantly he didn't even notice that he did it.
I did notice I did it. I just didn't want to show off in the middle of a Fulham podcast when I knew that a lot of people would be listening, rather than watching. So I thought it was best to keep an eye and just let the people decide. Do you know what's really funny? I don't normally split the G, but because we were on camera, I actually normally split the harp and the N. It's always the game I've played.
Okay.
But I was like, this is going on YouTube. I'm gonna have to try and go a little bit harder. So yeah, it paid off.
I've just watched it. I've just watched it back. It's not subtle. He's really gone for it there. There's at least 3 gulps. So well done.
Look, when you play the game, you play the game.
I'm sad you don't have one now to try and achieve it again.
We'll go for one afterwards, Sam.
Sounds good. Chris Inman says, "Good evening from Denver. As we get ready for the season, I'd love to know what Lizzie's spreadsheet model says about our points target should be for the end of September. Then I'd love the Thursday Club's opinion on what targets should be for top 10 instead of avoiding relegation. I think we need 10 to get clear of the relegation rat race and position ourselves for the top 10. So I think he's saying how many points should Fulham have by the end of September.
September to be looking at a European charge or a top 10.
I think
10
he's
charge.
to be looking at a top 10. So I'm just trying to think of the games before then. Obviously played United 0, Leicester, Ipswich, West Ham, Newcastle and Forest.
Is it just September?
End of September. How many points do we need?
By the end of September. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. From 6 games, 10 points, I'd say.
12.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair.
If
you need more than 2 points a game to get in the top 10?
No, because you can have a
Not
bad
2
month.
points.
I just think it'd be good to have a good month early.
There is also actually, in terms of fixture difficulty, you're looking at Forest, Leicester and Ipswich in there. That should be at least 9, and then you're probably looking at getting a win against either Newcastle or West Ham. Yeah. 12 is fair.
We meant to say it in the Leicester bit, but we were very poor last year at taking full advantage of playing the bottom 5, whereas the season before we were almost faultless. If I'm believing it, remembering it correctly. Yeah. But last year we did get the double over Luton, but we obviously drew away at Sheffield United, nearly lost it, and it wasn't that impressive at home. Burnley, we all remember, was a disaster both home and away.
Yep.
We lost to Brentford at home, only drew with them away, and we lost to Forest away. Did actually smash them at home. So we do need to get a little bit better. And I think
Tighten up.
if we'd have done well against the bottom 5 last year, or done better, we'd have got a top 10 finish.
Yeah.
We were only about 2 points away from it in the end. So he asks about Elizabeth's table. So if people don't know this, Elizabeth Barnard, who is a regular on Fulhamish, has a page in her notebook where she goes through all the Fulham games and says what the minimum we need is in every fixture, whether we need a draw or a win. I don't know if this is some sort of catharsism for her, but she...
Sounds like a terrible idea. Sounds like raising expectations way through the roof. I don't need that.
So, but she's very... her expectations are very low.
Right, okay.
So it's very much the minimum of what... I think she's looking at 40 points, basically.
Right.
Anyway,
Although we don't need 40 points. 40 points hasn't been needed to stay up for ages.
I asked Liz, and she sent this voice note with her answer as to exactly what Fulham need by the end of September.
For those unfamiliar, the last 2 seasons we've been in the Premier League, I've created a little chart of all the fixtures that Fulham are going to play with a guide to survival, i.e. which fixtures we need to win and draw in order to get to 37 points, which I think is enough for Premier League survival, following the general rule that you can win a quarter of your games, draw another quarter, and afford to lose the other half. Also, home advantage is massively factored into this chart. With all that in mind, looking forward to the end of September, I think we only need 7 points. Our 3 points will come against Leicester at home, I hope, this weekend. So fingers crossed for that. And then picking up a few draws against Ipswich away, West Ham at home, Newcastle at home and Forest away should be enough to get us to be on track with this. Obviously, I want Fulham to do better than just holding on by their fingernails into the league. So I'm hoping for a better return for that. But to answer your question, the answer is 7.
Very good.
There we go.
That's some way to live. Some way to live.
The definitive answer from Elizabeth Barnard. Chris, thank you very much for your question. This one that's very pertinent, given that it's the first home game of the season, from Mark. Says, hello Fulhamish gang, I'm a regular listener, occasional emailer. Sitting on the beach on holiday, I've just learned that I can now download my digital season ticket, which we've all got to experience this weekend. Like many long-time season ticket holders, I suspect, I hadn't really noticed that this change was occurring. This is clearly a further attempt to extract cash from the existing season ticket holders, because it will almost certainly end the option for mates to share a season ticket and or for families and friends to share tickets around. The club claim that they're prepared to issue hard tickets for exceptions. Does anyone amongst Fulhamish community have any experience of trying to get a hard ticket, or are we now going to have friends borrowing phones for the afternoon? Thoughts, reactions from Mark?
I mean, we can transfer tickets. So basically what the digital season ticket is supposed to do, look, whether this works or not is a different question mark. So like, as in, take this with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
But like, the idea is that basically your digital season ticket ends up downloading the next game's ticket for you. So rather than it being one thing for every game of the season, it's a ticket for each game that just updates automatically in your phone. From there and from the website, you are supposed to be able to transfer tickets over to anyone in your friends and family contact list who has a Fulham account, and they can download the ticket from their phone and therefore use it without you necessarily needing to hand over your physical season ticket card. So in, you know, on a top level and kind of in theory, it's actually a really good thing, because it means that you can basically just flip the ticket to someone else within your network without them having to pay for it, or, you know, to have to go through the reprint charges or any of those things.
Or having to, you know, get a first class stamp.
Yeah, well, exactly. So on paper, it's actually probably a positive. Whether it works such in execution or not, yeah, we're yet to be seen.
Yeah, I think the only thing that is potentially annoying is if you want to give a ticket to a mate that doesn't have a Fulham client reference number, that feels particularly they're going to have to sign up.
They have to sign up for a Fulham account, yeah.
And then you've got to add them as a friends and family. It's a bit faffy.
Yes.
But also, I believe, so instance, my mum is coming on Saturday.
Yeah, I was going to ask, can you have 2 tickets on your phone?
I've got 2 season tickets on my phone.
Right.
and I'm just going to give my mum my phone,
And then pass it back.
to my
That
mum
seems reasonable.
through the turnstile. I hope it works. All I'm saying, I'm getting there early on Saturday. I'm not, and normally me and my dad might rock up at 1:45. I'm just getting in at 20 past, because I'll just have an extra pint at the ground that I might normally have at the pub.
Use your free one.
Yes, we got free ones in the season ticket packs, and that's actually a really nice touch. They also was 40% off a replica kit as well. The club shop queue on Saturday is going to be pretty
Filthy.
hefty
Stay away from it.
as well, but with a lot of people trying to claim that. So Keith from Bournemouth, it wasn't Keith from Bournemouth. That's who asked my next question. Mark, who was on the beach somewhere. I'm hopeful that it'll all be fine, but I reckon there's going to be teething problems.
Yeah. I mean, it's Ticketmaster. Of course, there's going to be teething problems. Have you ever been to anywhere with Ticketmaster as the main ticket sponsor that has worked seamlessly? I
mean, also, like, the website is horrible. The experience of actually doing it is minging. But, like, at the same time, if you kind of persevere and understand all the tech weird jargon that it throws at you, I think it's possible. The proof's in the pudding on Saturday. Final one, this was from Keith in Bournemouth. He says, "Hi guys, I'm looking forward to the coming season, especially after the introduction of new signings, although we still need replacements for Polinia and Willian. But the reason for my email is that all good things must come to an end. And finally, we have confirmation that Captain Ream has departed for Charlotte FC. Now, seeing as players in the recent past have been seen off in a rather shabby manner from Fulham, how can we pressurise the club's top brass into bringing this icon of the club back for a well-deserved testimonial game? He may not quite have the 10-year qualification, but I cannot think of another player so deserving of one. He led from the front, led by example, and led through adversity. The place would no doubt be a sellout for a man who is Fulham through and through. What say you guys?" I mean, Peter, surely you've met Tim a lot of times through your work at Fulham. I think the man's fully deserving of a testimonial. I don't care if it was 9 or 10 years. Like, I fully am in agreement here with Keith.
Yeah, I don't know what how it works in terms of the rules. Depends how strict you are.
It's been a long time since we had one.
Yeah,
Morgan, right?
Simon Morgan, yeah. That'd be about right. So, look, I mean, what can you say about Tim Ream? I mean, Tim was always from a personal perspective, he was always really fantastic to deal with. Always gave you thoughtful quotes and reflections. I think he's probably the player I've spoken to the most, actually, at Fulham, thinking about it. So, I was on the press conference that he gave to once his deal with Charlotte was confirmed, and it was good to speak to him there. And he talked about how it was a personal decision for his family, that the club hadn't actually, didn't really want to lose him, that Marcus Silva tried to persuade him to stay, and Silva then said on Friday that he had, loads of ideas for him, and keeping him at the club in a role. Although Ream did say that he doesn't want to be a manager going forward. It doesn't appeal at all. But yeah, it seems like a very personal decision to him to go this summer, and Fulham then let him go for free as well, just to honour his years of service. So I think he would have been on course for a testimonial. So in a sense, he's that 1 year early is, his decision to go may cost him that. But he did say he's already in discussions about returning, and I presume that will be for something like a Forever Fulham or something like that. But there will be an opportunity, definitely, I imagine, in the not too distant future, perhaps when the MLS season finishes, for him to say a proper goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, I think he'll be back relatively soon. Obviously, depends if Charlotte qualified for the postseason or not. So, depending when that will be. The other thing is, though, that it's a bit weird to do a testimonial for someone when they're still playing. It feels. I know that it has happened before. I'm not suggesting that it's completely out of the question, but like the idea of doing a testimonial for someone who's still. Imagine if they got injured. Like what would their new club do? Their new club be absolutely fuming. So I assume it kind of only really happens when a player is close to retirement. And it doesn't look like Tim's gone over there to retire. It looks like he's gone over there to try and force himself into the the USMNT squad for the 2026 World Cup, to make sure that he's still playing regularly week on week, that he still has a claim for that. So I don't think we will see a testimonial for Tim Ream anytime soon. We're not going to see a testimonial at Christmas for Tim Ream. I think it will be something that maybe is talked about after he actually retires. And I think you'd probably say the same for TC. You know, TC looks like he's going to be here for that 10th year. Whether he stays beyond that and joins the club setup or whatever, I don't know. But if Tom Cairney left next summer and, I don't know, rejoined Hull and spent another year or two in the Championship, I don't think you can do a testimonial for him while he's playing in the Championship. You have to wait until they're finished. I have a funny feeling that because so much of their careers have been spent at Fulham together, that we will end up with a Tom Cairney / Tim Ream testimonial match.
Yeah.
That they'll do one for both of them to honour them, and that will be how it's kind of put together. So it would be, you know, interesting to see how that's developed. But I think something will come of that in the long run, but not anytime, you know, soon.
Also, I think with the new stand and everything else like that, I think there might be more opportunities for Fulham to host it might be a post-season little match as well. Again, how that fits with MLS and its calendar year schedule.
Honestly, I think it's when someone genuinely hangs up their boots. That's the kind of time that's done.
I'd be amazed if we don't find a way of getting it done. So yeah, Keith, very good suggestion. I'm hopeful that one day we will see that testimonial. What a day!
What a day it will be.
As Jack Kelly would say, we will be there.
We will be there.
That will do for the podcast today. Fulhamish will return on Monday morning. George is going to be in the hot seat for this one, looking back at everything that happens in the Leicester City game. And then myself and Jack, at least, will be back this time next week, looking ahead to the end of the transfer window. Have a lovely weekend wherever you're watching the game. I hope you have a good one. Jack, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sammy. It was a pleasure.
Peter, thank you.
No, thank you very much.
And come on, you Whites.
You Whites.